Alrighty, everybody. It is currently Saturday, February 7th, 2026, and I am coming at you live from a land down under, where women go when men blunder. Can you hear the thunder? Like I said, in honor of Alexander Volkanovski uh, beating Diego Lopez for the featherweight title, or to retain the featherweight title in the UFC, it is Straya week here. You know what I mean? We're going full Straya. Um, I it would be very funny if I did this whole thing in an accent, but when I do an accent too long, first of all, the accent isn't good to begin with, and then it just morphs into I don't even know what. I start speaking a different language. So I'll try to throw in an accent here and there, but it's mostly just going to be the same old dumb voice I always use. Um, but yeah, this episode we're talking about a guy named Henry Lawson, uh, considered one of, if not the greatest Australian writer of all time. Which, look, I love the boys down under. Love all the boys down under. The abos, the whites, everybody. I love them all. Um, Not a group of people that I would assume would be amazing writers or really thinkers in any way, shape, or form. Like I said, love the boys. Love all the boys. Keep going. Hell yeah. Going through some shit right now. They're dealing with the same problem the rest of the world is. Indians. Like I said, love the boys, love all the boys. Down under. But yeah, the regardless of race, skin color, whatever, they're not a group of people that I associate with academia. You know what I mean? Necessarily. I associate it with a lot of fun shit, with a lot of cool, good shit, thinking, knowledge, general intelligence. Um, are not those things. You know, I don't associate any of those traits with the country of Australia or the Australian people. Love them to death, dude. But yeah, not a very bright group of people. Henry Lawson, though, he's not very Australian, as we'll come to find out. He's from Australia. He lives there, but he's just not very Australian. You know what I mean? Although a lot of what Henry Lawson writes about is the inland of Australia. It's one of the big things he likes to write about. And most people in Australia, like literally almost everybody, lives on the coasts, right? Because obviously the entire middle part is a giant desert. So pretty much everyone um, lives on the coast. Like even the Aboriginals mostly live on the coast and stuff like that. There is some stuff inland, right? There's like Alice Springs. That's their big inland city. It has like 30,000 people there. Um, so yeah, it does make sense that he's a little bit less Australian because he writes, or he doesn't have that Australian spirit as much because he lives on the coast, but he mostly focuses on things from the inland, um, which not a very exciting place. There's some cool stuff out there, but not a place you want to live. You know what I mean? Definitely not a place you want to live. It's like Alaska. Everyone is always like, "Oh, I want to live in Alaska and live out in the cabin, live in a cabin in the woods or whatever." It's a shit a lot of people say. No, you don't. You will kill yourself if you. And especially, it's like a lot of young people saying it. Like, I just want to get away from it all and go live in the middle of nowhere. It's like, no, you're gonna kill yourself if that happens. So it's very, and people imagine like the cold is depressing. The heat can get pretty depressing too. You know, like the dry, like constantly getting beat down by the sun. There's a certain uh, your will is slowly eroded by just like the constant pressure of the sun and the heat on you all the time. Um, so yeah, the outback can be pretty depressing as well, but I don't want to get ahead of myself because we're going to read a story from Henry Lawson called The Drover's Wife. Um, like I said, I think it's going to be a lot less complicated, going to be a lot less big words at the very least than the Aleph, and it's a slightly shorter story. I think it's 6 pages shorter. Um, and I'm going to try to run through that quickly. And don't worry, everybody, we're not going to be doing popcorn reading. I'm not going to be calling on anyone to read, so you don't have to keep track in your textbook. But let's get into the life story of Henry Lawson. How did he become so un-Australian? So, at 21 years old, Niels Hertzberg Larsen set sail from Norway to mine for gold in Australia. He would arrive in Melbourne in 1855 and eventually change his name to Peter Lawson. How he got from Niels to Peter, I can understand how he got from Larson to Lawson, because people with that like Australian type, British type accent can't really say their R's super well. I know everyone always makes fun of the Chinese for not being able to say their R's. The Brits are also not great at saying their R's, right? Like they would say Peter like almost like Lois Griffin, like Peter. This is my friend Peter. It's Peter. There's an R at the end there. Don't know if you noticed that, you limey cunt, but there's an R at the end of that name. So I understand how he got from Larson to Lawson, because he's like, these fucking Brits don't know how to say their R's anyway. They would say it like Lawson. Hey, Peter Lawson. That's how they would say it if his last name was still Larson. So I understand how he got from Larson to Lawson, but from Niels to Peter, I don't know how he got there. But he is Australian, you know what I mean? So, and he chose at 21 years old to get on a boat to go to a continent that's basically just a giant desert. So maybe not the best decision maker the world's ever seen. Maybe not the best decision maker. Maybe that's how we got from Niels to Peter, but somehow got to Peter Lawson eventually, which is the anglicized version of his name instead of the Norwegian version of it. So Peter met his wife, Louisa Albury, who would eventually become Louisa Lawson, while working in the gold fields of pipe clay, which is now called Eurondery, and the two would go on to have a long and unhappy marriage. So yeah, he's working in these about. I don't know how this very young woman ended up in the gold mining fields of pipe clay, but somehow she did. And this is like a big thing they do in Australia, where they change the name from like the English version to the Aboriginal version, which I always found weird, because it's like the Aboriginals didn't build the city. You know what I mean? The English did. Not saying you should kill all the Aboriginals, right? Not saying you should do all that, but it was the English who built the city, right? So they kind of get to name it. They stole the land. You want to call the land but even then, like everybody steals the land. So I don't know. I always found that a little bit weird, because it's like they didn't build this. The English built the city, or the Australians built the city, I guess, not the English, the Australians. But still, always found that a little bit odd. But yeah, Louisa Albury and Peter not gonna have a great marriage, and that's makes sense why our boy Henry chose to get a little bit depressing. So the two married in July of 1866, when Louisa was 18 and Peter was 32, which people are going to be like, oh, well, that's legal, or they're going to be like, oh, well, it was the 1800s or whatever. And I kind of get that, you know what I mean? It's the outback in Australia, but it's always weird whenever it's 18 and like a 21-year-old, because it's like, I know what you were up to. All right, we all know what you were up to. Or like 18 and maybe not 18 and 21, although there can be some weird stuff with that. But like 18 and 32 is like, we all know. Come on, we know you didn't wait your fucking turn. All right, you know. We know you didn't wait until she was 18. Let's call a spade a spade. You didn't. All right, we know that. But that's when they end up getting married. And 11 months later, they had their first child, Henry. I think they ended up having 4 children together. At least one daughter. I think it was one daughter and 3 boys. And like I said, it's Australian outback, 1800s. Probably one of those kids died. Or I don't know if it's the outback, but it's like rural Australia in the 1800s. So they definitely got like some weird fucking disease that like right, the kid definitely got some weird disease that made all like his arms long or whatever, and he died as an infant. Um, and so young Henry was sent to school in 1876, but he experienced an ear infection that caused partial deafness, and by 14, he was completely deaf, entirely deaf, totally deaf. And the deaf people, they always do end up getting pretty emotional. You know what I mean? Like Beethoven. Beethoven was a really emotional guy, um, really his entire life, but especially after he became deaf. Or not deaf, after he became deaf. Um, yeah, I don't know what it is about deafness. I guess it's just not being able to hear other people talk and like being able to hear the tones of their voice or something like that. But they do get real emo with it. You know what I mean? The deaf people do. I feel like blind people, they're chilling with like a dog all day. You know what I mean? They're chilling with a yellow lab or whatever. They have that cool cane that they get to walk around with, so they don't usually become as emo as the deaf people. But yeah, deaf people always end up pretty pretty deeply in the emo camp. And so during this time, Louisa ran boarding houses and eventually saved up enough money to buy shares in the Republican, which was a nationalist newspaper which ran from 1887 to 1888. Had a pretty short lifespan, but it was pretty significant in her son's life, which we're going to talk about later on. But yeah, she was like a pretty hardcore nationalist. She really wanted Australia to be its own like federation or republic or some shit like that. Like th- I guess they fucked a little bit with the British Empire, you know what I mean, that they were under the dominion of, and I'm pretty sure they were under the rule of the British Empire until like the 40s or the 50s, maybe even the 60s or some shit like that, and they still have the British flag on their flag, you know what I mean? They have the Union Jack on there. Um but yeah, she was pretty strongly in the nationalist camp, and they were called Republicans because they wanted Australia to be like its own independent republic. Is basically what that means. It kind of has nothing to do with the American Republican political party. It was more so a political movement that was more akin to independence and nationalism than it was to the conservatism of the American Republican Party. And so after becoming fully deaf, Lawson, Henry Lawson, not Louisa, was sent to Catholic school where he was introduced to poetry and the great Australian writers by his headmaster, Mr. Keevan. In Australia, this is, so he was born 1867, so this is 1881 when he's sent to this Catholic school and he's, you know, introduced to all these things. Australia had only been discovered by the West and really anyone outside of the immediate vicinity of Australia for like 100 years, maybe. What was it? Was it 1788 when James Cook landed there? And that's when they discovered it. That's not when they did start settling it pretty soon after, but they discovered it in like 1788. So it's only been 100 years. So Australia really has not had a chance to establish a lot of great writers. And like I said, love the boys. Literacy and things like that are not part of their culture. Hardworking people also love to have a good time, but not a group of people that I associate with higher education. Not a bad thing, but it's just not what I associate them with. And so that's kind of how Henry Lawson gets introduced, and he was he wrote a lot of poetry. Like that was, especially early on in his career, that was kind of his main thing, was writing poetry. He eventually gets into story writing, short stories. I don't think he ever wrote a novel, um, but wrote a lot of short stories, a lot of collections of short stories, and also these things called sketch stories, which we'll talk about. I almost read one of those, but they're just so short that I didn't want to do that for this one. But it starts off with poetry, because of this teacher, Mr. Keevan. And so in 1883, when Lawson was, I think, 21 years old, something like that, Louisa invited Henry to live with her in Sydney, with her and his siblings. And there, Henry would study for university entrance exams, but he ultimately failed. So during this time, he was working as a house painter with his dad, um, up in like the Blue Mountains. I don't know exactly where that is in Australia. I didn't even know Australia had mountains like that. I actually looked at a picture of them. They are pretty mountainous. But he was working up in the Blue Mountains with his dad, painting houses and like working as a builder and stuff like that. And his mom was like, "Come down to Sydney," which Sydney always kind of been the biggest city in Australia. Don't know why. It's really not that close. It's on the Pacific Ocean, which is like the opposite way that the British have to come to get there. You would assume like something on that west coast, like Perth, or I think Adelaide's on the west coast. I know Perth definitely is. You think Perth would be the big city, but I don't know. Maybe I think Sydney has a lot of rivers and stuff like that, which aren't super common in Australia. So maybe that's why Sydney was the big city. I don't know, but it's the big city. And Henry moves there. He's trying to get into college. I have to assume he's going in for literature, but fails the college entrance exams. And this is Australia. Australia is not a very populated country even now. So back then, I have to imagine there was maybe like 100,000 at most people living in Australia. No, not 100,000, but not a ton of people either. So probably not a lot of universities. So you probably had to be um, pretty pretty legit to get into a university in Australia. So Henry would visit a doctor at age 20 who told him that his hearing couldn't be fixed. And while working at railroads in Newcastle, he would visit the Wickham School of Arts, where he, quote, haunted the School of Arts, still with an idea of learning before it was too late. So yeah, he was just hanging around college. I guess not trying to go to parties or anything, but just like lurking in the halls, hoping he could do like some Goodwill Hunting type shit and then be accepted into the college. I have no idea. I have no idea what his plan was at this point, but a lot of depressing things. You know what I mean? One after the other. Thinks he can get his hearing fixed. Turns out he can't. Fails his college entrance exams, and then just kind of lurks around the school like a ghoul or a ghost or something like that, dude. Yeah, you're a ghoul, but what's a ghoul to a goblin? That's the ultimate philosophical question that we might do an episode about later. But Henry's a ghoul, and he's just lurking around the school hallways and stuff like that. Maybe trying to get some freshmen. I see what you're up to, dude. You, your daddy's son, Henry. Henry, you are your daddy's son. All right, I know you trying to get some freshmen. So he's lurking around there for a while, uh, and he's still super into writing and stuff like that. And so Henry's poem, which was called "A Song of the Republic," was published in the Bulletin, which was like a big newspaper, in 1887. And in 1888, Louisa founded the Dawn, which was a feminist newspaper. So the Bulletin was one of the big newspapers at the time. It might still be a big newspaper, I don't know, but it was a very big Republican newspaper. Remember, Republican is the nationalist movement in Australia. And so obviously Henry's mom is super strongly associated with the Republican movement and stuff like that. And so that's kind of how this story and or this poem, A Song of the Republic, ends up in this newspaper. Isn't just because of Henry and his talent and the nationalist nature of the poem. It was because his mom had a lot of connections. And so this is 1887 and Henry's 20 at the time. But they wrote like a preamble to the poem describing Henry and stuff like that. And for some reason in the preamble they said he was 17 years old. They just lied about his age to make it seem more impressive or something like that. It must have been like a good poem for a 17-year-old, but like a mediocre poem for a 20-year-old. I don't know why they wrote that he was 17 in their preamble or postamble. but they did it. Um, and Louisa, so this is basically right after the Republican, her newspaper, stops running, but apparently she made a ton of money from it, which is how she ends up founding the Dawn newspaper. And so the Dawn would run until 1905, so 17 good years there. But Louisa continued in her suffragette writing until her sickness and eventual death in 1920. So Louisa was into all sorts of shit, but she was mostly into nationalism and feminism, which those two uh, often don't go together. You know what I mean? But she was really into both of those things, and it makes sense, dude. She was a tough bitch. She ran her own boarding houses, grew up in like the gold mines of Australia, married a guy when she was 18 and he was 32. Dude, this was a tough lady. Um, and she ended up dying in a mental hospital, but she had like pancreatic cancer or some shit like that, I think. So, but that's just how they did medicine back in the day. They were just like, if anything's wrong with you, it's because you're insane, and I'm gonna put you in a fucking white room somewhere. Um, and so that's kind of Louisa. She's pretty famous in and of herself. I guess she's one of the most famous Australian, feminists or suffragettes or whatever. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of the influence she had over Henry's life. Is he doesn't end up being the biggest feminist in the world, as we'll come to find out, but he is a pretty strong nationalist. Uh, and so now, when I say Lawson for the rest of this story, we're going to be talking about the boy himself, Henry, the kid, the Outback Kid. So Lawson began a relationship with writer Mary Gilmore in 1880. In the following year, he was hired at the Brisbane Boomerang. Things are looking up for our boy Henry here. He's got a bitch. Her name is Mary Gilmore. She's also a writer. I think she was a nationalist writer as well. The guy's whole world revolves around Australian nationalism. And the Brisbane Boomerang is a very funny and very Australian sounding name for a newspaper. Um, there's another newspaper called the Melbourne Boomerang, or as Australians would say, Melbourne, but there's an R in there. Let's say the R. It's pronounced Melbourne. Um, but those two have nothing to do with each other. But Brisbane Boomerang. I mean, what a fun name for a newspaper, dude. And he's got this bitch. He's working at like a fun, goofy newspaper, and he's got a bitch named Mary Gilmore that he has a lot in common with. How's this gonna work out? Well, Lawson and Gilmore, they had an unofficial engagement, but it ended up breaking off due to Lawson's frequent absences from Sydney, and the Brisbane Boomerang quickly found itself in trouble. I tried looking it up to see what ended up happening with it, but it kind of seems like it just like collapsed in on itself. Like the Brisbane Boomerang just imploded, and I think the Brisbane Boomerang, um, it was kind of as goofy as it sounded. Like Lawson was a writer; he wrote poetry and short stories and sketch stories and stuff like that. Um, but if I remember correctly, the Brisbane Boomerang was super into like cartoons and stuff like that. Like they drew, I'm sure they were political cartoons or nationalist cartoons, but it wasn't exactly up Lawson's alley, or Henry Lawson's alley. And it collapsed in on itself very quickly. I think it was around for like a year. And so Henry ended up finding himself working for the Bulletin, who paid for an inland trip for him in 1892, where he was exposed to the harsh realities of the drought stricken outback. Um, and so, yeah, this is where a lot of his writing ends up coming from, because there was this other guy, his name was like Peter Banjo or some shit like that. Um, but he was another Australian writer, and he used to write like almost like a Wild West type stories and poems about the Australian outback. But then Henry Lawson goes out there and he's like, dude, this place fucking sucks. This place sucks dick with its butt, dude. This place is fucking horrible. Uh, And so that's the conclusion that he comes to. And so he starts writing a lot of stories about the outback and stuff like that that really contrast um the like idealized, romanticized stories that Peter Banjo. It was something Banjo. I don't remember what it was, but the guy's last name was Banjo. I don't think it was his real last name, but still, it's what everyone called him. And so he probably got that job at the Bulletin because of his mom, but he's a pretty great writer. So Henry did odd jobs for the Two Rail Cattle and Sheep Station, and that's two rail spelled Toorale, or maybe it's a U, Turule, whatever it is. It's not like a rail station. It's just where you bring cattle and sheep and stuff like that. And so he worked in like the woodshed. He did odd jobs for them around there while also working for the Bulletin, where he published his stories, which were depressing and clashed with the idyllic poems of Banjo Peterson. So it wasn't Peter Banjo, it was Banjo Peterson. And yeah, that's where a lot of his stories, and he also writes like I think a few opinion pieces and stuff like that, but those are greatly influenced by the work he does at this two rail cattle and sheep station. Um, and so yeah, they're pretty depressing. The guy's deaf. He's working at like a tool, or not a tool shed, a wood shed at a fucking sheep station. He's not living the most fun life, you know. And when this guy Banjo Peterson is writing all like these fun, funky songs about, you know, cowboys riding out in the outback or whatever, killing aboriginals, whatever the fuck he was writing about, um, Henry's like, no, this shit fucking sucks. The outback fucking sucks, dude. Very depressing guy. Really, really bringing the whole vibe down. But it was kind of the truth, dude. Like the outback probably has the highest suicide rates in Australia, probably some of the highest addiction rates. Even now, it's not a great place to live. Even now, unless you can really figure it out. If you're a desert person like that, um, you know what I mean? Like desert people can only live in the desert. I feel like people who like the mountains can figure out a way to live somewhere else or whatever, but people who like the desert really only like the desert. It takes a very special type of person to live out there and not become a debilitating alcoholic. Um and so Peter, he's writing all this stuff, just being a general depressing kind of a loser. He's kind of a loser in a lot of ways, but the guy doesn't have any hearing, and it's like the late 1800s. I imagine that wasn't the greatest life ever. And so in 1896, Lawson married Bertha Brett Jr. And had two children, and the couple separated in 1903. And this was like an official, like court-sanctioned separation. And in her affidavit, Brett described Lawson as an abusive drunkard. So a funny thing about Bertha Brett Jr. is she was the daughter of obviously Bertha Brett Sr., and Bertha Brett Sr. was, uh, let me look this up. I'm pretty sure this is right, but I'm pretty sure she was like one of the other main feminists of Australia. She was an Australian political activist and a writer. She was apparently born in Prussia. No, I guess she was super into socialism. Okay, so I guess she wasn't as much of a fucking uh feminist, maybe necessarily, but I guess she was a socialist. I don't know. But she was the daughter of a more progressive person, and obviously, I wouldn't say Lawson is expressing conservative behavior, but definitely not feminist behavior. I think that's fair to say. Um, and yeah, they end up getting divorced because of that. I think he had a son named Henry Lawson Jr., and he's not really in young Hank's life. Doesn't really take the best care of him. So after the divorce, Henry bought a room at Mrs. Isabel Byers' Coffee Palace where he would live for 20 years until he ends up dying. He dies when he's like 40 or something like that. So he lives in a coffee palace in Sydney, and he doesn't buy, it's just like a room. It's like a bed and like a desk. That's basically the room that our boy, old Henry Lawson, lives in for 20 years until his death. And he's not like a, I'm trying to think he's not like Vincent van Gogh, where Vincent van Gogh was like struggling his entire life and then he only became like well known after his death or whatever. Lawson was, he was successful, pretty successful and pretty widely acclaimed over the course of his life. But he's still living in a room in a coffee palace. And so from 1905 to 1909, Lawson was jailed 7 times for a total of 159 days at Darlinghurst Gaol. So spelled Gaol. And I guess that's just like the old word for jail. And so he was at Darlinghurst jail for 159 days from 1905 to 1909. It was a bunch of separate ones. And this was the inspiration for his poem 103, and he called it Starvinghurst Jail. But my whole thing about this is like, if you're gonna be deaf and write a bunch of depressing shit, like that's understandable to me. Like that's a a situation that you just find yourself in that has been done unto you. But you going to jail because you refuse to pay child support and like see your kids and stuff like that, that's entirely your fault. You don't get to write a depressing poem about it because you fucked up tremendously throughout your life, right? You don't get to be like, oh, woe is me. You know what I mean? If like I said, if you get that ear infection when you're young and go deaf when you're a kid, or your dad fucking rapes you or whatever, sure, write a bunch of whole depressing woe is me poems about it. But don't go to jail 7 times for refusing to take care of your kids and then be like, the world just hates me. Everything sucks. You know what I mean? It, it's just a bitch shit. That's a real bitch shit right there. And so yeah, that's kind of where Henry Lawson's at in his life at this point. And despite his poverty, depression, and habitual drunkardness, Miss Isabel Byers regarded Lawson as the greatest living Australian poet and would help Lawson secure publishing and financial assistance. Yeah, so she really liked her boy Lawson right here. She would like go out and basically be his like agent or manager or publicist. I don't know. All those things are the same thing. It's all just to steal money from like dumb famous people. But whatever it is, she was that, and I think she was doing it pro bono. She might have took a little bit of cash. You know what I mean? Might have took a little bit of cash. But I do think she like let Henry live at the coffee palace and like didn't hold him to the same standard she did everyone else because she was also a writer. I think a pretty well known one, if I remember correctly. But in some capacity, she was also a writer. And her and Henry had like a super had like not a super close relationship, but they were friendly with each other. And Mrs. Isabel Byers took good care of him, despite the fact that he was a gigantic piece of shit kind of across all aspects of his life. Didn't take care of his kids, probably didn't take great care of his house, was drunk constantly, probably was not great to women. Yeah, kind of a piece of shit. But anyway, on September 2nd, 1922, Lawson died of a cerebral hemorrhage in Mrs. Isabel Byers' coffee palace. In the room he rented 20 years ago, 2 years after his mom dies, he dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. And I guess the one good thing we can take out of Henry Lawson's life story is at least he was deaf and he didn't have to listen to his mom bitch about feminism. That's the one positive. That's the one positive that came out of Henry's, deafness and all that stuff. So he probably would have beat his wife a whole lot worse if he had to listen to his mom constantly complain about the patriarchy or whatever. Anyway, so over the course of his life, Lawson was widely considered the greatest bush poet, which he wasn't really a bush poet. Like, a lot of bush poems are more lively and fun and have like a fun rhyming scheme or whatever, whereas Henry's shit was obviously very depressing. And he was also considered a master of the sketch story, which a sketch story is basically like, it's not, you can't even really call it a story. It's it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's like an outline of a story almost. You know what I mean? It doesn't have any plot, and it mostly just describes like one short conversation, or one like short walk through like the scenery or whatever. That's basically what a sketch poem is, and it mostly focuses on like describing things, which, I mean, that's kind of what most things are, but it doesn't focus on the plot or anything like that. It's just describing the landscape, or the feeling of the situation. You know what I mean? It's almost like impressionism, but for writing, I guess is how I would describe it. And so that's Henry Lawson's life story. I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'm going to pull up The Drover's Wife, and we'll read that. Don't worry, like I said, no popcorn reading. No one's getting picked. So yeah, we'll do that. All right. Well, I just wet my whistle real quick, and we'll get into The Drover's Wife. Like I said, I think it's about 12 pages. Not 12 long pages, 12 pretty short pages. And so we'll get into it. The two-roomed house is built of round timber slabs and stringy bark, and floored with split slabs. A big bark kitchen standing at one end is larger than the house itself, veranda included. Bush all around, bush with no horizon, for the country is flat, no ranges in the distance. The bush consists of stunted, rotten native apple trees, no undergrowth, nothing to relieve the eye save the darker green of the few she oaks which are sighing above the narrow, almost waterless creek. 19 miles to the nearest sign of civilization, a shanty on the main road. The drover, an ex-squatter, is away with sheep. His wife and children are left here alone. Four ragged, dried-up looking children, goddamn, going after him, are playing about the house. Suddenly one of them yells, "Snake! Mother, here's a snake!" The gaunt, sun-browned bushwoman dashes from the kitchen, snatches her baby from the ground, holds it on her left hip, and reaches for a stick. "Where is it?" "Here, gone into the wood heap," yells the eldest boy, a sharp-faced, excited urchin of 11. "Stop there, mother." "I'll have him. Stand back, I'll have the beggar," which I guess that means bugger. "Tommy, come here or you'll be bit. Come here at once when I tell you, you little wretch." already, already we're dealing with a very depressing depiction of a eternal, ever-reaching, infinite landscape of brown disgustingness, and in it inhabits more brown, disgusting people. Not okay, that came out wrong, but you guys know what I mean. Just dirty, covered in, sand and dirt and whatever blew up during the dust storm out there in the outback. Yeah, Henry, I'd say I did a pretty good description of his life story, just in the general depressing nature of it, because, I mean, immediately into it, we're dealing with something. It's a little bit exciting, a little bit more exciting than what I anticipated. Really, I didn't read the story in advance, but kind of what I was anticipating was just like a description of a lady sitting alone in a house doing nothing. I thought that's what the whole story was going to be, but hey, we got a snake right off the rip, which I kind of shit on him for not having the Australian spirit, but killing a snake with a stick, you know what I mean? Not even a page into the story, that does sound very, very Australian to me. And so, "Tommy, come here or you'll be bit. Come here at once when I tell you, you little wretch." The youngster comes reluctantly, carrying a stick bigger than himself. Then he yells triumphantly, "There it goes, under the house," and darts away with a club uplifted. At the same time, the big, black, yellow-eyed dog of all breeds, who has shown the wildest interest in the proceedings, breaks his chain and rushes after that snake. He is a moment late, however, and his nose reaches the crack in the slabs just as the end of its tail disappears. Almost at the same moment, the boys' club comes down and skins the aforesaid nose. Alligator takes a small notice of this and proceeds to undermine the building. He is subdued after a struggle and chained up. They cannot afford to lose him. All right. The drover's wife makes the children stand together near the doghouse while she watches for the snake. She gets two small dishes of milk and sets them down near the wall to tempt it to come out, but an hour goes by and it does not show itself. God damn, these people are fucking. This is just pure white trash that we're dealing with here. Kid has a big old stick, ends up hitting the dog with it. The dog is attached to a rusty chain, and then this dumbass bitch is like, "What do snakes drink? Milk, I guess?" I don't know what the plan was there. I guess she thinks that snakes drink milk, but she's like, we're going to tempt this thing out with a big old gallon of vitamin D milk. Great plan. Great plan. Very, very white trash so far. I love it. It is near sunset, and a thunderstorm is coming. The children must be brought inside. She will not take them into the house, for she knows the snake is there, and may at any moment come up through the cracks in the rough slab floor. So she carries several armfuls of firewood into the kitchen, and then she takes the children there. The kitchen has no floor, or rather, an earthen one, called a ground floor in this part of the bush. There is a large, roughly made table in the center of this place. She brings the children in and makes them get on this table. They are two boys and two girls, mere babies. She gives them some supper, and then before it gets dark, she goes into the house and snatches up some pillows and bedclothes, expecting to see or lay her hand on the snake any minute. She makes a bed on the kitchen table for the children and sits down beside it to watch all night. She has an eye on the corner and a green sapling club laid in the readiness on the dresser by her side, together with her sewing basket and a copy of The Young Lady's Journal. She has brought the dog into the room. Tommy turns in under protest, but he'll stay awake all night and smash that blinded snake. His mother asks him how many times she has told him not to swear. He has his club with him under the bedclothes, and Jackie protests. "Mummy, Tommy's skinning me alive with his club. Make him take it out." Tommy, shut up, you little. Dyer want to be bit with the snake. Jackie shuts up. "If you're bit," Tommy says, after a pause, "you'll swell up and smell and turn red and green and blue all over till you burst. Won't he, mother?" "Now then, don't frighten the child. Go to sleep," she says. Yeah, this is just a trailer trash experience. You get the kids sleeping in the kitchen. There's a dog, you know what I mean, chained up inside somehow. They somehow get the dog chained up inside. There's a snake on the loose. it, it does seem to reflect a lot of young Henry's life. You know what I mean? His mom, I do think his parents do end up becoming pretty successful, but at least for a short while in his life, he grew up in a gold mine in Australia with a Norwegian dude who probably didn't speak a word of English. You know, this is real white trash type shit. So the two younger children go to sleep, and now and then Jackie complains of being skeezed. More room is made for him. Presently Tommy says, "Mother, listen to them. Adjective. Little possums. I like to screw their blanky necks." And Jackie protests drowsily, "But they don't hurt us, the little blanks." "Mother, there, I told you, you teach Jackie to swear." But the remark makes her smile, and Jackie goes to sleep. God, this Tommy kid is a real. We got a Dahmer on our hands, is what I'll say. Killing the snake, okay, that's one thing. You gotta kill the snake. You don't want anyone to get bit or whatever. I understand that. But but just wanting to kill possums for no reason. And possums in Australia, you know what I mean? American possums are pretty cute, but they do have like that weird, like scaly tail or whatever. But possums in Australia have like a big, like squirrel tail. They're very cute creatures. And this kid is like, I want to kill them all. Not to eat, not anything like that. He just wants to murder possums. Like I said, the whole snake thing I get. Also, the kid doesn't seem to show any remorse for smacking the dog on the nose with a club. I think we got a Dahmer on our hands. And so presently Tommy asks, "Mother, do you think they'll ever extricate the adjective kangaroo?" So I'm sure adjective is like bleeding or fucking or some shit like that. "Lord, how am I to know, child? Go to sleep." You will wake me if the snake comes out? Yes, go to sleep. Near midnight, the children are all asleep, and she sits there still, sewing and reading by turns. From time to time, she glances around the floor and wall plate, and whenever she hears a noise, she reaches for the stick. The thunderstorm comes, and the wind, rushing through the cracks in the slab wall, threatens to blow out her candle. She places it on a sheltered part of the dresser and fixes up a newspaper to protect it. At every flash of lightning, the cracks between the slabs gleam like polished silver. The thunder rolls, and the rain comes down in torrents. Alligator lies at full length on the floor, with his eyes turned towards the partition. She knows by this that the snake is there. There are large cracks in that wall opening under the floor of the dwelling of the house. She is not a coward, but recent events have shaken her nerves. A little son of her brother-in-law was lately bitten by a snake and died. Besides, she has not heard from her husband for 6 months and is anxious about him. Jesus. So her nephew gets bit by a snake and dies, and her husband's just gone for 6 months. I don't know. I don't know how like pastoral, you know what I mean, herding works and stuff like that. But 6 months, they must be out in the bush, dude. They must be out in the middle of nowhere. Like I don't know if Henry Lawson ever went that deep in the bush, even with his trip for the bulletin or whatever. 6 months, the motherfucker's gone, and she knows he. I mean, you got to be worried about the snake, obviously, in this situation and taking care of your kids or whatever. But I mean, I'd say there's a good 95% chance that her husband comes back with like the clap or chlamydia or something like that. You know what I mean? Like a real, like a disease that it doesn't kill you, but it like gives you like weird, like pus and stuff like that. That's what I imagine she's also worried about. So her husband, he was a drover and started squatting here when they were married. The drought of 18 ruined them. He had to sacrifice the remnant of his flock and go droving again. He intends to move his family into the nearest town when he comes back, and in the meantime, his brother, who keeps a shanty on the main road, comes over about once a month with provisions. The wife has still a couple of cows, one horse, and a few sheep. The brother-in-law kills one of the sheep occasionally and gives her what she needs of it, and takes the rest in return for other provisions. She is used to being left alone. She once lived like this for 18 months as a girl. She built up the usual castles in the air, but all her girlish hopes and aspirations have long been dead. She finds all the excitement and recreation she needs in the young lady's journal, and heaven help her, takes a pleasure in the fashion plates. Her husband is an Australian, and so is she. He is careless but a good enough husband. If he had the means, he would take her to the city and keep her there like a princess. They are used to being apart, or at least she is. No use in fretting, she says. He may forget sometimes that he is married, but if he has a good check when he comes home back, he will give most of it to her. When he had money, he took her to the city several times, hired a railway sleeping compartment, and put up at the best hotels. He also bought her a buggy, but they had to sacrifice that along with the rest. Yeah, so this bitch, she knows this motherfucker he's getting busy, dude, and he's not getting busy with no high class whores. He's fucking real, like missing teeth type bitches. He's fucking bitches that look like him. You know what I mean? He's like this dusty old, cattle driver or whatever, and he's fucking winning that look. I mean, it's just him with long hair. She knows that. We know that. But she still thinks he's gonna treat her like a princess. He's not, dude. Hey, babe, listen here. I'm gonna be your gay best friend and give you advice. It's time to drop that man. Although this is Australia in the 1900s, so if you drop that man, you're not gonna be able to get a job or have money or anything like that. So I guess my other gay guy advice is just accept that you're gonna get chlamydia, okay? That's my other gay guy advice. All right. The last two children were born in the bush, one while her husband was bringing a drunken doctor by force to attend to her. She was alone on this occasion and very weak. She had been ill with a fever. She prayed to God to send her assistance. God sent Black Mary, the whitest jinn in all the land, or at least God sent King Jimmy first. And he sent Black Mary. He put his black face round the doorpost, took in the situation at a glance, and said cheerfully, "All right, missus, I bring my old woman. She sat down along a creek." Okay, so yeah, Black Mary and King Jimmy, the whitest gin in all the land. At first, I thought it was insinuating that she was getting drunk while she was having a kid, which I don't know what that. I know you're not supposed to drink when you're pregnant, but if you're pushing the baby out, is the alcohol gonna. That can't cause fetal alcohol syndrome, right? So that's what I thought um, Black Mary was at first because they said gin, but I think they're talking about Aboriginal people because they call them blacks down there, right? That's like their version of black people, I guess. Um, and so I think that's what they mean by Black Mary and King Jimmy is a couple abos that live around and like help them and stuff like that. Good people. And so anyway, one of her children died while she was here alone. She rode 19 miles for assistance carrying the dead child. It must be near 1 or 2 o'clock. The fire is burning low. Alligator lies with his head resting on his paws and watches the wall. He is not a very beautiful dog to look at, and the light shows numerous old wounds where hair will not grow. He is afraid of nothing on the face of the earth or under it. He will tackle a bullock as ready as he will tackle a flea. He hates all other dogs except kangaroo dogs and has a marked dislike to friends or relations of the family. They seldom call, however. Very sad. He sometimes makes friends with strangers. He hates snakes and has killed many, but he will be bitten someday and die. Most snake dogs end that way. So I guess in Australia they just had dogs that were like dedicated to eating snakes, which is very Australian. Just to have like some shitty mutt with a bunch of scars on it that just like rips snakes to death, just like it's very. That's the spirit of Australia right there. That's what I like to hear out of Australia. So now and then the bushwoman lays down her work and watches and listens and thinks. She thinks of things in her own life, for there is little else to think about. The rain will make the grass grow, and this reminds her how she fought a bushfire once while her husband was away. The grass was long and very dry, and the fire threatened to burn her out. She put on an old pair of her husband's trousers and beat out the flames with a green bough, till great drops of sooty perspiration stood out on her forehead and ran in streaks down her blackened arms. The sight of his mother in trousers greatly amused Tommy, who worked like a little hero by her side, but the terrified baby howled lustily for his mummy. Howled lustily. I don't know how much I like that. So anyway, the fire would have mastered her but for 4 excited bushmen who arrived at the nick of time. It was a mixed-up affair all around. When she went to take up the baby, he screamed and struggled convulsively, thinking it was a black man. And Alligator, trusting more to the child's sense than his own instinct, charged furiously and began. Old and slightly deaf, did not, in his excitement, at first recognize his mistress's voice, but continued to hang on to the moleskins until choked off by Tommy with a saddle strap. The dog's sorrow for his blunder and his anxiety to let it be known that it was all a mistake was as evident as his ragged tail and a 12-inch grin could make it. It was a glorious time for the boys, a day to look back to and talk about and laugh over for many years. That's very funny. I thought he was getting picked up by a black man, but to be fair, I don't think this kid is necessarily racist, because if I thought my mom was going to pick me up and then it was just a black dude just holding me, I would also be scared. You know, not really because it's a black dude, but because it's like, you're not my mom. And it's so funny that the dog attacks her. Just tries to rip her to shreds. Good dog, though. Hey, solid dog. Any dog that attacks black people is all right in my book. Can I say that? Can I express that opinion? But like I said, I'm pretty sure black means Aboriginal in this context. Might be wrong, but pretty sure. Yeah, I don't think there were a lot of African people hanging out in Australia. They already had a good, and I don't think they had like slavery like that in Australia. I'm sure they did have slaves. Obviously, it's part of the British Empire. They had slaves, but I don't think it was like America or Brazil or anything like that, or the Arabic caliphates where they just had like slaves on slaves on slaves. I think they're referring to Aboriginals here. All right. She thinks how she fought a flood during her husband's absence. She stood for hours in the drenching downpour and dug an overflow gutter to save the dam across the creek, but she could not save it. There are things that a bushwoman cannot do. Next morning, the dam was broken, and her heart was nearly broken too, for she thought how her husband would feel when he came home and saw the result of years of labor swept away. She cried then. She also fought the pneumonia, dosed and bled and few remaining cattle, and wept again with her two when her two best cows died. Again, she fought a mad bullock that besieged the house for a day. She made bullets and fired at him through cracks in the slabs with an old shotgun. He was dead in the morning. She skinned him and got 17 and 6 for the hide. She also fights the crows and eagles that have designs on her chicken. Yeah, that says designs on her chickens. I don't know. I guess that's just old talk for they want to kill the chickens. Her plan of campaign is very original. The children cry, "Crow's mother," and she rushes out and aims a broomstick at the birds, although it were a gun, and says, "Bang!" The, the crows leave in a hurry. They are cunning, but a woman's cunning is greater. I mean, like I said, I don't think Henry Lawson exactly was the feminist that his mother Louisa was, but he does seem to have some admiration for the tough bitches out there. You know what I mean? He does seem to recognize and appreciate a tough bitch, which I do as well. I appreciate a tough bitch. And it seems like this lady, the drover's wife, is that. You know what I mean? A fucking cow's attacking her. I think that's what a bullock is. I think it's like a bull with its testicles still. It's fucking attacking her, and she's like in the house like a zombie apocalypse movie, shooting at it through the door. It's pretty sick, dude. This lady rules. I fuck with this lady heavy. The kid, Tommy, I don't know about the other kid, Jackie, but Tommy, a little bit of a psychopath, it seems, but that might be good. That might be exactly what you want out in the bush like that. And so, fighting crows and stuff like that, real tough bitch. So, occasionally, a bushman in the horrors or a villainous looking sundowner comes and nearly scares the life out of her. She generally tells the suspicious looking stranger that her husband and two sons are at work below the dam or over at the yard, for he always cunningly inquires for the boss. Only last week, a gallows faced swagman. God, I feel like that to me has very racist undertones. Gallows faced swagman. Because swagman, we gotta be talking about a black dude here. Maybe not. Maybe they're talking about a cowboy or something like that, but swagman makes me think black. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. So, only last week, a gallows faced swagman, having satisfied himself that there were no men on the place, threw his swag down on the veranda and demanded Tucker. I imagine that means he got naked and said, "Let's fuck." She gave him something to eat. Oh no, food. And then he expressed his intention of staying for the night. It was sundown then. She got a batten from the sofa, loosened the dog, and confronted the stranger holding the batten in one hand and the dog's collar with the other. "Now you go," she said. He looked at her and at the dog, said, "All right, Mum," in a cringing tone, and left. She was a determined-looking woman, and Alligator's yellow eyes glared unpleasantly. Besides, the dog's chawing up apparatus greatly resembled that of the reptile he was named after. This is just a tough bitch, dude. She got the dog and the baton. She's ready to beat this motherfucker to death. She has few pleasures to think of as she sits here alone by the fire, on guard against the snake. All days are much the same to her, but on Sunday afternoon she dresses herself, tidies the children, smartens up the baby, and goes for a lonely walk along the bush track, pushing an old perambulator in front of her. So I think that's just stroller. She does this every Sunday. She takes as much care to make herself and the children look smart as she would if they were going to do the block in the city. There's nothing to see, however, and not a soul to meet. You might walk for 20 miles along this track without being able to fix a point in your mind unless you are a bushman. This is because of the everlasting, maddening sameness of the stunted trees, that monotony which makes a man long to break away and travel as far as trains can go and sail, and as far as ships can sail, and further. But this bushwoman is used to the loneliness of it. As a girl wife, she hated it, but now she would feel strange away from it. Girl wife. Once again, don't know how much I like that one, dude. Gallows faced swagman and girl wife. Gallows faced swagman is going to be the title of this episode. That's too funny. So anyway, she is glad when her husband returns, but she does not gush or make a fuss about it. She gets him something good to eat and tidies up the children. She seems contented with her lot. She loves her children but has no time to show it. She seems harsh to them. Her surroundings are not favorable to the development of womanly or sentimental side of nature. It must be near morning now, but the clock is in the dwelling house. Her candle is nearly done. She forgot that she was out of candles. Some more wood must be got to keep the fire up, and so she shuts the dog inside and hurries off round to the wood heap. The rain has cleared off, and she seizes a stick, pulls it out, and crash, the whole pile collapses. Yesterday she bargained with a stray black fellow. Stray black fellow, that's also very funny, could be the title, to bring her some wood. And while she was at work, she went in search of a missing cow. She was absent an hour or so, and the native black man made good use of this time. On her return, she was so astonished to see a good heap of wood by the chimney, she gave him an extra fig of tobacco, and praised him for not being lazy. He thanked her and left, head erect and chest well out. He was the last of his tribe and a king, but he had built that wood heap hollow. Oh, he scammed her, dude. This black fellow scammed her. That's just so funny, though. There's just dudes wandering around there. And it makes sense because, I mean, people have lived there for like thousands of years and stuff like that, but it's just so funny that he's just like walking around with nothing. Just piling up hollow wood piles for a fucking little pinch of tobacco or whatever. But yeah, if you didn't get what that was, this dude scammed her. He made this big old pile of wood, but it was like hollow in the middle. Which, yeah, God, dude. Hey, he got her. So she is now hurt, and tears spring to her eyes as she sits down again by the table. She takes up a handkerchief to wipe the tears away, but pokes her eyes with her bare fingers instead. The handkerchief is full of holes, and she finds that she has put her thumb through one and her forefinger through the other. This makes her laugh to the surprise of the dog. She has a very keen sense of ridiculous. Sense of ridiculous is also hilarious. And some time or other, she will amuse Bushmen with the story. She has been amused before like that. One day she sat down to have a good cry, and she said, as she said, and the old cat rubbed against her dress and cried too. Then she had to laugh. All right, last stretch here. It must be near daylight. The room is very close and hot because of the fire. Alligator still watches the wall from time to time. Suddenly, he becomes greatly interested. He draws himself a few inches nearer the partition, and thrill runs through his body. The hair on the back of his neck begins to bristle, and the battle light in his yellow eyes. And the battle light is in his yellow eyes. Fuck, dude. She knows what this means and lays her hand on the stick. The lower end of one of the partition slabs has a large crack on both sides. An evil pair of small, bright, bead-like eyes glisten at one of these holes. The snake, a black one, We know how we know how she feels about the blacks. We know how she feels. They scammed her. One of them scammed her, but it kind of seems like one of them gave birth, so I'd say that well cancels it out. But anyway, the snake, a black one, comes slowly out about a foot and moves its head up and down. The dog lies still, and the woman sits as one fascinated. The snake comes out a foot further. She lifts her stick, and the reptile, as though suddenly aware of the danger, sticks his head in through the crack on the other side of the slab and hurries to get his tail after him. Alligator springs, and his jaws come together with a snap. He misses, for his nose is large and the snake's body close down in the angle formed by the slabs in the floor. He snaps again as the tail comes round. He has the snake now and tugs it out 18 inches. Thud, thud comes the woman's club on the ground. Alligator pulls again. Thud, thud. Alligator gives another pull, and he has the snake out. A black brute, 5 feet long. The head rises to dart about, but the dog has the enemy close to the neck. He is a big, heavy dog, but quick as a terrier. He shakes the snake as though he felt the original curse in common with mankind. The eldest boy wakes up, seizes his stick, and tries to get out of bed, but his mother forces him back with a grip of iron. Thud, thud, the snake's back is broken in several places. Thud, thud, its head is crushed, and Alligator's nose skinned again. She lifts the mangled reptile on the point of her stick, carries it out to the fire, and throws it in, then piles on the wood and watches the snake burn. The boy and the dog watch too. She lays her hand on the dog's head, and the fierce, angry light dies out of his yellow eyes. The younger children are quieted and presently go to sleep. The dirty-legged boy stands for a moment in his shirt, watching the fire. Presently he looks up her, sees the tears in her eyes, and throwing his arms around her neck, exclaims, "Mother, I won't never go drovin'. Blast me if I do." And she hugs him to her worn-out breast and kisses him, and they sit thus together while the sickly daylight breaks over the bush. And that is The Drover's Wife by our boy Henry Lawson. I'd say not a very depressing story at all. You know, the scenery is a bit depressing, her life is a bit depressing, but this individual moment, not super depressing. I'd say it's pretty sick. They end up killing the snake. But that's all I got for this episode, guys. I hope everyone listening has a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Ping.